And we're live. So this is episode 3, third episode of Redefining Advertising, a little podcast that I started a few weeks ago, mostly to keep myself busy and to keep my creative juices flowing a little bit. But I'm hoping that some of the people that are in my audience and my network kind of get some benefit from what we've been doing so far. The response has been really, really great. So I'm just going to keep it going and hopefully there's benefits on both sides to myself and to my audience. So with me this week, we're talking about creative. The past couple weeks, we talked about e-commerce. We talked about storytelling. I think one of the most interesting things over the past probably 5 or 6 years in the world of advertising is how creative has had to change with the times that have changed. And Steve Babcock has been a chief creative officer, a creative director, an executive creative director at different companies, and really has some insights as to how that creative process has changed. I think one of the most interesting things for small and mid-sized businesses as it compares to like the advertising capabilities they now have in this current social and digital age is that they can really play with the big boys. Whereas like maybe 10 years ago when advertising was all TV and print and things like that, you really needed to have a massive marketing budget in order to really kind of get yourself known and get your brand known. But now with Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, a lot of these platforms have really, entry-level rates to get your brands out there and get it known. So the marketing level has the marketing field has kind of leveled off. And I feel that there's more opportunities for small, mid-sized brands to really kind of take advantage of some of these marketing opportunities that the big brands have done. And I actually think some of these smaller brands have made better headways in the social and digital space because these bigger brands have to change their marketing philosophy. And it's been really interesting to see the landscape. Steve and I worked at VaynerMedia a few years ago, and I remember when he came in, it was this really weird transition time. I had been at Vayner a few years before Steve came in, and we had been working with our clients to get them to convince them just to be like, hey, let's get your content on social and digital platforms. And it was a grind to get some of these bigger brands to agree to spend serious marketing dollars in that space. And when Steve came in, they were kind of buying into that philosophy. And so it really had to shift and kind of like mold around a new way to creatively think about, how brands kind of get best traction on those platforms, and not just educating on what those platforms do best, but also educating brands on how to maybe you got to start thinking about something bigger and better than just putting a 30-second commercial spot in someone's newsfeed. So I'm super excited to have Steve on today. I think there's going to be some great conversation. I got a lot of great videos queued up that we're going to kind of dive in on and talk about. So Steve, why don't you give us a brief introduction to who you are, where you come from, and what you've been doing over the past year or so since you've left Vayner.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Yeah. Hey guys, my name is Steve Babcock. As Jason said, I've been a copywriter, creative director, executive creative director, group creative director, chief creative officer at various agencies for the last 20 years. And the last year, I decided to jump out on my own, and I started a little company, little meaning just myself, called Made In-House, where I work directly with brands and help them build their in-house creative capabilities. And that's what I've been doing for the last year, at least up until recently, where everything's kind of significantly slowed down. But that's still where my passion is today.
So you've gone into a world that's really interesting to kind of maybe start the conversation off in, because I think that over the past 5 years, I think advertising and creative has changed drastically. Probably hasn't seen this big of a change since the advent of television. When TV came along, radio and print were the king to the advertising world. And I think in the past 5 years, we've seen a new king that's come along with, where advertising is going. Why don't you give us a brief history, because you were in the game for such a long time as a creative director and a group creative director. How have you seen this environment shift and change from where we were in the advent of television creative and how creative was made specific to TV, and how creative has had to shift and kind of change over the past 5 years with the advent of social and digital kind of really taking, a stake in advertising dollars?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it used to be quite simple, really, because there was only so many mediums you would create for. So every time you got a brief, it was like, well, I know we're gonna answer it in one of 3 ways. And it was actually pretty kind of routine. It's like come up with some television scripts, get a director, get approval, go out to LA, spend a lot of money and a lot of time, shoot this thing, come back. And that was the job. It really was. And then all of a sudden, you had this explosion of new media and the ability for anybody to create, anybody to publish. And I think at first, and as you referenced, even kind of when we first met at Vayner, a lot of clients were still just sort of not poo-pooing it, but just like, I don't really know what that is. And I know this old world, and this is kind of the routine I like to be in. And now I think we're at a time where it's like, okay, clearly that we've passed that. Like social media, all of these channels, they are the channels. There's headlines after headline after headlines. Media spend is being shifted over into this space. But what I find interesting is a lot of agencies and a lot of creative people at those agencies are still very resistant to that type of thinking, and they're still so there is still this little bit of a push and pull, this little bit of a friction right now. But I would say I get really excited personally about the space we're in now. I think one of the resistances is it's harder, meaning it takes a lot more to create uniquely for each platform, right? We went through this process where everybody said, cool, let's still make the TV spot or the thing that's kind of like a TV spot. And then let's use those assets and just kind of chop them up the appropriate ways for the appropriate platforms. And that proved to not work very well, but you're an agency and you're just looking at costs and like, well, we can charge for all these different assets off of one production. It didn't really work very well. Now you move into a spot where it's like, okay, we need to basically create uniquely for TikTok. We need to create specifically for Instagram. We need to create specifically for this, because not the platforms are different, the audiences are different, the behaviors are different, the expectations of how a brand will utilize that platform is different. So all of a sudden, it's not so simple. It's not the check boxes you have, the potential, when you get a brief, it's like you have hundreds now. And again, there's two mindsets. There's those who get really excited about that. And I find that to be with a lot of, a lot of the younger crew that are just entering the workforce. It's really exciting to work with them because that's all they've known. But one of the challenges are a lot of the people who've been in the industry for a long time who are resistant and just like, no, I'm comfortable in this space of how we've always done it. And so I think it's not just a volume game. I mean, volume is part of it, but it's like you now have to, for the same budget, make 10 things that are good. That's the key. It's not just like tons of content to make content. It's like, no, they each specifically have to be awesome on their own. So I do think that's one of the biggest challenges is it's now there's just a million different pipes to play in versus just the 3 that we used to have.
Yeah, I think the thing that's super interesting from a creative perspective too, and you can speak better than this than I can, is that, coming up with the one creative idea that's going to suffice for all of those different channels and platforms. Like, it's very challenging. It's different when you're making one commercial that can play across ABC, NBC, Fox, and you're basically pairing it with the exact right program that it can kind of relate to. But when you're working with different platforms, and you're right, each one has its own set of rules, its own set of like levels of which how success is measured. Like, how do you come up with that one creative idea and then fit that creative idea into each of those buckets?
Yeah, exactly. I think, one of the things that I've started to probably over this last year, really, and one of the reasons why I decided to go work directly with in-house is because I've started to realize the potential of being very specific to channel versus like, here's one idea and I'm going to try to put it across everything. I think a lot of, the reality is like the platforms aren't like so crazy different that like, one idea can't fit on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. Now the format needs to change, obviously, but for the most part, things can play in that space. But I found it really interesting. One of the more interesting changes that I'm really passionate about is I think social media has allowed brands to start to function more like media networks than advertising, right? If you look at how the internet or how the world on the internet makes content, they're kind of making these quote unquote shows, I mean, we're on one right now, and it's like brands have the ability and the opportunity right now to go, hey, how could we how could we become our own Netflix? Like, what are the ideas that we're putting out sort of episodically or serialized in order to build some equity in that creative idea? So I think that's a fun place to play as well. But at the end of the day, like, you can't just cut and paste. There's gotta be some method in it. You really gotta go, wait, does this make sense here? Does this make sense here? And I think the challenge is, again, you have a lot of box checking where you're just trying to satisfy a client by saying, cool, we have an idea, we've put it everywhere, case closed. And the return on that historically is not shown to be very, very good, but it's easier, but it's not necessarily as effective as it can be.
Right. It's interesting you say the network thing. I'm reading an interesting book right now called Storynomics. I don't know if you've read it, but it's super, super good. And one of the things that is mentioned, it's really talking about, branded storytelling and how, brands really need to look at long form storytelling, like movies and TV shows, and how the story arcs go, and how even though you're telling a 2-minute or even a 5-minute or even a 1-minute, piece, that story arc should still apply. There's still an arc in a story. There's still ways in which we as human beings, identify with story. And when you tell it in the proper way, even if it's a short form, there should be a connection to that story. Anyways, I digress because it gets back to this marketing idea of like brands being a media agency. He posed the question as to why Pepsi only buys the halftime show and not the entire Super Bowl. He took, and again, I don't have the numbers correct, but he took like Pepsi's annual marketing budget. Let's say it's $1 billion. The cost that ESPN or whomever bought the Super Bowl last year was like, let's say $750 million. He's like, why didn't they just buy the Super Bowl? And Pepsi, you put a Pepsi app and everybody has to watch the Super Bowl through Pepsi. Think about all of the content Pepsi could get, interviewing the players, being at the actual event. Like they could bank a year's worth of content for less than they spent on their marketing budget the previous year if they just bought the Super Bowl. And I was thinking, like, that he's so right. Like there are massive events like that where the market is so huge. If a brand were to like get in that space of competition with like a network, the return on investment could be massive.
Yeah. And you're starting to see, whenever I talk about, the term that I've been using is called branded programming. And I think it's the evolution of branded content, because it's branded content, but you're making systems, you're making
right.
Like, I got an idea for a show. I'm going to put this show out, but I'm going to make another one and another one and another one. And you've seen like, there are so many great shows on social, there's a great show called Hot Ones, which I think just like got bought by television. I think it's on like E or something, or True TV or something, where they eat the chicken wing. Okay, that's a kid on YouTube that made this show. It got popular. He started to get celebrities. Everyone liked it. They're like, that's great. Why didn't Buffalo Wild Wings make that? There's another great one called Dad Jokes, which as a dad, it's my favorite. You've seen it. Maybe the two comedians just tell each other really bad dad jokes. And if the other person laughs, then you get a point. They've made hundreds of them, just a YouTube show. They started to build equity, build a following. Will Ferrell, Mark Wahlberg came on to promote their like Daddy's Home 20 or whatever. It's like, why didn't Gillette make that? Like, why aren't brands? And you're starting to see it. Like I'm starting to see like, oh, there was a show idea. There's something that you've been doing over and over. And I think one of the values of doing things, and not everyone will work, just like classic television, like every 10, they make 10 pilots a year, only 3 of them succeed. And that's okay because they didn't invest a ton of money on each like little pilot. But I think, one of the things that's really interesting that you're seeing about, or one of the reasons you would want to do that is because right now, the shelf life of culture is so short. Like, you reference even Super Bowl. I remember a time when you'd buy a Super Bowl commercial because we and the media would talk about it for a good month after. There would be like rankings and this one was better than this one. We don't even make it to like midnight anymore. We're done. We're on to whatever's the next big, fiasco or political gaffe or whatever. And so I even think when brands attempt to like come up with that viral hit, which used to kind of be the playbook, in a lot of cases, like that's great and all, but you're still spending a lot of money to just be the shelf life for that day. So I think you want to have a mix. I think you want to have those things as well. But if you're building this foundation of branded programming, you're kind of building over time, but it's like, then you've got equity. Now you've created a media channel. You've made a hit show that people love to tune into and watch over and over. Now you can use that to advertise stuff on, but like, why aren't brands making that themselves versus thinking, oh, I've just got to jump on to, Hollywood's thing or whatever. So I think I personally am banking that's kind of the next evolution of social marketing. So it is more branded programming. And again, I jumped to in-house because one of the biggest challenges I found at an agency, even an agency as scrappy as Vayner, was like, it was hard to have that pilot mentality to make and still run a business. I would still hit that moment of like, well, we're an ad agency. We live off of like markup. We have to hit the margin versus like in-house. They've got a lot of great production talent. And they're just salary. They're just like, we work here from 9 to 5. Like, show us a new way to do it. And so in the last year, for me anyway, I've shown that has made the difference. Like, I've got the clients I've worked with. It's like, okay, we're making shows. This is working because again, it's just a different business model.
Yeah, totally. So before we jump into some examples of really great branded storytelling, long form, like, I think I want to touch on one other thing that's super important, because I think it's one thing that social and digital have done for brands that I don't think any other medium could have done. And that's word of mouth. Back in the day, I remember growing up, like, we probably had products in the house because like our next door neighbor was like, oh, I just bought this great thing, and they ate it and they're like, here, you should try it. And that's how we basically consumed or went into the store and bought certain things. Nowadays, word of mouth is everywhere on social. So if you're a brand that puts something out that's either rhetoric or misinformation or, God forbid, offensive to anyone, that becomes a stain that is spoken around the world. How have and how has the audience? I think this is such an incredibly different shift because, you look at 5 or 6 years ago, your brands were beholden on the Nielsen ratings, right? Like, did the TV show get great ratings that we advertised on? And if so, we can kind of assume that 5 million people saw our ad because 5 million people tuned into that TV show. But they didn't really have the feedback. They would just say they were in their little bubble, the creative bubble, making the content or making the commercial, putting it out there and hoping that it resonated with that audience. Now there's immediate feedback, there's instantaneous feedback. And how has that feedback and that relationship between the brand and its audience and its consumer, how has that changed? Or how have you seen that change creatively over the past 5 years? Like, you get into a room with some creatives and start thinking about, let's look at comments before we even start thinking about the idea.
I mean, it's huge, and obviously we've seen a lot of situations where brands have taken huge hits, Pepsi back in the day with the Kylie Jenner, Peloton recently, and I think, the internet is as a mob, I think it can, there's the good, it can bind together and do a lot of good, but it can also bind together and just like decide we're going to crush this thing, and like, but I do think that's the most important part is like nowadays, especially before you really even lift a pencil and start to come up with an idea. That's one of the benefits now is we have this wealth of real human research that's there. It takes time, but like dig into comments, dig into like it is. I can't remember. I mean, I'm old enough to where I was doing this job before there was really the internet. Or not the internet, but social media. Not that old. But like, I can't remember how I did it. I'm like, how did we come up with ideas? And nowadays, I got a brief, and the first thing I do is like, let me search Twitter. Let me see what people. Let me get on their Facebook. Let me get on their Instagram and look at the comments. And it is. If you don't start there, if you don't start and really dig into kind of how culture is thinking, how your audience is thinking. I remember an example. And this is a while ago. I wouldn't say it's the most creative execution. A lot of brands do it now, but it works. We were working with a brand, a yogurt brand that had just like rabid following. Like it was like really good yogurt. It's called Noosa, and their fans just like it was like yogurt, but like you loved it. It was really, really good. And you would look at we got more entertainment, more product benefit, more testimony out of just like what people would say unprompted, like on Twitter and they would just post like this about, and then, we came up with an idea. And again, this was a while ago. Was like, well, let's come up with a show. It was kind of a show, but it was going to be a social content series or some various post ad type things. And we're going to call it Fanimations. And that came because we were just like, these things, we were just dying laughing. We're like, that's hilarious. This is great. How do we make that into an ad? How do we take that? So the whole concept was we literally just took the craziest, silliest, funniest tweets and kind of created an animation, like brought them to life. So for example, there was one lady that I think was married to a guy named Luke because she just said, if I could marry a yogurt, I would divorce Luke and marry Noosa Lemon. Like, so we took that and made like this little animation of the woman getting rid of Luke and marrying a tub of yogurt. And it's like, and that was amazing. And obviously the fans loved it. And then once fans started to see like, oh, they might take my tweet and use it as their screenplay to make an ad, that worked really, really well. And again, that was us taking word of mouth and then just putting media a little bit of production and media dollars behind it. So I think there's a lot of positive too. And again, even on like the negative side. So in a previous life, I worked at an agency that handled the Domino's Pizza account, and they did a very, very kind of famous campaign now called Pizza Turnaround. A lot of people may remember it, where they took and again, this was it was stuff from focus groups, but also social media where people were tweeting like Domino's Pizza sucks. It tastes like cardboard. They took all that because they had they had redone the whole recipe and they wanted to do a campaign to kind of promote, hey, we've got a whole new pizza, but they used all of this negative word of mouth and like actually put it in their commercials and basically said, okay, we hear you. And that's why we're changing everything. And even that made the consumer go, whoa, like I've got to try this, because they're taking this so seriously that they've listened to people. So it's not necessarily using, people's comments and things in your advertising, but the learning that you get from that, like it's, if or anything, even if you're an old school agency still making television commercials and billboards and newsprint, but if you start your process by really consuming all that your target audience is just putting out into the world, that's the benefit of social. We just said, here's a place where everyone can say what they want, and there's no shortage of people saying what they want. So I think that's it. It is the number one resource. I think it's where you start for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think, not too long ago, they were paying, hundreds of thousands of dollars in focus groups and in research and in analytics and people just to kind of help me understand my audience. I think now you can get that information for free. Like there's you want to test your creative and see if it's working. Like do a blind test with a handful of audience members on Facebook, run a $5 ad. You'll see what the response is. If it's working, great. If not, then just pull it and try something else. So I think like using the internet or using Facebook specifically or Instagram as a resource for your testing grounds for your creative, I think is something that, 5 years ago, people would have died for that information, would have killed for it, paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for it. So super interesting. One thing also that's interesting for me, and as we kind of segue into like longer form branded content and storytelling, is how certain brands get out of the way of that storytelling. Like I've seen branded content that's like, maybe, let's call it in excess of 3 minutes long. It's kind of funny because now Facebook, I remember back in the day, Facebook was like, you've got to tell the shortest story, 3 seconds, get it all in there. Now I ran an ad for my company a week ago, and it was like only a minute and a half. And they're like, well, we are seeing 3 minute, if your video should be longer than 3 minutes. I'm like, 2 years ago, you guys were saying 30 seconds or less, get it in and done in 3 seconds if I can. Now they want me to have my content being 3 minutes or longer. And so it's crazy how in very short period of time, we've shifted from this, get everything in there super fast to no, take your time and tell the story and let it be longer than 3 minutes. And we're seeing people engage with content for longer content. So that mind shift and that shift on social platforms is crazy for me to think about it, because I struggle. I know you did too. We're at Vayner, we struggled with brands being like, no, you got to get your brand in 3 seconds. Like Facebook saying all their analytics are telling us that we have to do it this way. And they've kind of changed that. But the thing that's super interesting for me is I've seen some longer form branded content. And for the ones that I actually appreciate are the ones where the brands don't feel the need to be front and center, where like the storytelling is something that is front and center, and how they let their it's kind of an interesting perspective on how brands, I think, really need to start thinking about who they are personally and finding the stories that actually, connect with that audience. They're finding stories that like have a purpose that they can identify with. So one brand that I've fallen in love with is Yeti. The outdoor cooler. They made the cooler. They've done a bunch of outdoor stuff. And I'm not a big outdoorsman, but watching their content, first of all, they're not in the piece at all. There's not even a whiff of any type of advertising. I think some people are wearing like Yeti hats, but I'm wearing a hat right now. Like I'm not being paid to wear this hat. So it's such a background thing. But the thing that's so interesting is that the embodiment, the personability, the sense of freedom, the sense of what I would anticipate Yeti as a brand kind of representing and stand for totally comes through in the people that they put front and center. And it's super, super interesting. So I want to show, I'm not going to show the whole piece because it's pretty long, but I want to show this one piece. Maybe we can kind of talk about that on the backside. You can kind of jump in and tell me about how you've seen that trend change and how brands specifically need to kind of get out of their way when it comes to telling great story. So let's take it.
My grandfather's name in Navajo was Akutli, which means cowboy.
My grandmother always said, "I'll quit you tell ya," and it means if it's up to anybody, it's up to you.
You might know this guy. His name is Derek McGee.
We're pretty unique. We have a story. We have a tradition. We have culture. We have our own language. We have our own beliefs. We're one of a kind.
Being a Navajo, we learn from our parents, and they learn from their parents. Life teachings, that's what they give us.
Our ancestors, our grandfathers, our grandmothers back in the day, they had no education, but they had livestock. That's how they made their living. When I was growing up, you had to survive day to day, and it was really, really hard with our tribe.
I grew up without running water, without electricity.
There was no TV. There was no games. They just played with what they had outside. Real basic, simple home life. Che in Navajo is our grandfather. This is Grandpa's prayer. This whole thing, everything about our lives, Grandpa's prayer.
Can't have no excuses because I grew up on the reservation. That's the best thing to happen for me. When I got old.
So anyway, it goes on for another 10 minutes of beautiful footage and amazing storytelling. But the things that I'm watching, I'm kind of listening to certain things like, simple, family life, lifestyle, where I grew up, connections, all those things to me make me feel like the outdoors or like something that's much deeper. And as a brand, it's exactly what I want to be saying about my brand.
Yeah, I think, it's, to me, I feel like there's really two kinds of messaging or two kinds of approaches, really. There's sort of reason to believe, and then there's reason to buy. And what you're seeing, I think, are a lot of brands starting to realize, especially even right now, I think one thing that the current COVID thing is doing is forcing a lot of brands to go, whoa, who are we? And first and foremost, the foundation is a brand has to have a reason to exist that transcends just the thing they sell. And that Yeti thing is obviously is a very good example. Clearly, they have a reason to exist beyond just the cups and the coolers, and they have a reason. And so and that's where that gets really great, is like, because it used to be, to your point, like, when making an ad, does it show the logo? Does it show the brand? Does it show this? Well, it can, if you think of branding in those two cases. There's the reason to believe branding, which isn't necessarily a logo. I mean, I do think they were smart to kind of put it, you do want to get credit. You don't want someone to go, "Wait, I had no idea what that was for." But at the same time, it was like, you're seeing more and more brands wake up to that. Like, hey, even if I make tube socks, like, why do we do this? What do we think our impact is that we have on humanity, or what is the whole role we have in culture? Find that thing, and then make sure you're dedicating enough resources to that. I think you'll have a mix, and there's certain mediums and certain places where it makes sense to say tube socks, they're made with the greatest mesh toes and they're for $5. There's a place for that, and there's a time for that. But if you're only doing reason to buy, and you will only get to a certain spot, because we are emotional human beings, and we, especially, like, I love reading a lot of the reports and things coming out now where it's like, whoa, this is waking a lot of brands up to, like, brand matters, like, why you exist. I need to believe in you. And so I think that's really important. I'm not surprised when people see, for example, like that Yeti piece, and I know there's quite a few in that series that they do. Like, I like that brand. I believe, and
Yeah.
And that's branded, heavily branded, emotionally, philosophically. And I think a lot of people get those things confused, which is like, branding is boom, 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 boom. And you've got to have a good mix of reason to believe and reason to buy.
Love that. I mean, I'm sorry, but if you see that stolen from me in a post that I do this week, that I go off on a rant about, are you a brand to believe in, or a brand that you want to buy? That's really great insight. I love that. And the thing that's super interesting for me with that piece specifically is that, you have these core values that are part of it, and they do such a great job communicating. And there is massive amounts of series. Like, I've watched a lot of their episodes, and they cover the gamut. I mean, they have women fishermen in one of them. So they're checking a box there. And I feel like they have such an incredible way, because they know their audience, and they're not going, and I hate to use the analogy, but they're not going fishing for an audience that doesn't care or align with that brand philosophy. They know exactly who they want to talk to. They know exactly the lifestyle, and they're going all in on that. And I think that's something that as a brand, they're not trying to get the casual outdoorsman. They'll get them residually. Like me personally, like, I'm going to go camping with my family in a few weeks. Like, I'm going to buy a Yeti cooler because I'm into their brand now. But they're not focused on the outer periphery of their consumer brand. They're like super into the core.
No, it's true. And again, that's where you want to start, right? Because going back to what you were talking about a little bit earlier with word of mouth, yeah, they'll get, that's what you want to do. You want to go, I want to find my core, someone where there are reasons to believe really, really match. I, as a brand, have to prove it. That's the other thing. You can't fake it nowadays. You'll get called on it, and you got to be legit about it. And I guarantee, if we looked into Yeti right now, they would have a lot of places where they're walking the walk, where they're donating to, like, nature, what's the word I'm looking for? conservation.
Yeah.
They're probably doing all of that because they really believe it. And then they build their little army of people who are like, boom, I'm a Yeti person, da-da-da. And then I may post that. And then my periphery people are like, what's that? Da-da-da. You know, like I'm not a huge outdoorsman myself, but we have probably 10 Yeti cups here just because my wife is in athletics and things. And it's kind of gotten into that world as well, like health and fitness and good for the world. And it's a company that does things sustainably and et cetera. You know, so I think that is, to your point, that's why, you know, that's another trap that a lot of brands fall into is like, wait, you know, how do we just get to everybody? And it's like, well, if you're trying to be for everybody, you're going to be nothing to nobody or however that would work, you know? And so I think that's important. Like turn your people into ambassadors by being really, really sincere and honest about who you are. And then they'll be proud of you and they'll want to tell you about you.
Yeah, and the thing that they're super smart about too is that they rely on organic reach. They don't do a lot of paid media behind their spots. And if you look on their YouTube channel like that, I think that spot specifically had like close to 700,000 views, which is good. I mean, it's not like the millions that a lot of these massive brands really are looking for, but you're taking that and they've got like 17,000 likes and comments and stuff on it. That's an incredible conversion rate. I don't think people understand, like if those people are true diehard fans, 700,000 is a lot. And you can almost guarantee that they are people seeking that content out as opposed to being fed that content in their feed. And the other thing that's really smart about them as well is that they'll shoot these incredibly beautiful like pieces, like almost documentaries about these people's lives that align with their brand. But at the same time, they'll get the product shots. Like I've seen their Instagram page where they have like the beautiful product shot with like, you know, Navajo Indians in the background. And so like, it's incredible that they understand their market so well that they'll focus on these incredible pieces of storytelling, but then they'll find all this ancillary content that they'll still kind of position themselves as a brand around this bigger message that they're pushing out with these short films.
Well, I think that's proof that they got it right, that they're a sincere brand that has a reason for existing that transcends just the thing they sell, but the thing they sell obviously is in line with their vision. So it's not hard to put those things together in an image and to show how they would come together. Like, you know, I don't know if you ever remember, there's a great SNL skit years ago called Hard Cut Cheetos. Did you ever see that one? Or it's like, anyway, they're pitching Alec Baldwin, they're pitching the client these ads for Cheetos, and they're being really like, it's kind of in the wake of that, like Kylie Jenner, you know, they're being like super political, and then they're like hard cut Cheetos, you know, and the client's like eating it up. But that's true. Like we as consumers will sniff out a disconnect in a second. If your reason to believe is like not even close to what, you know, your reason to buy, it's like, wait a minute, no, you're making that up. You have to walk your walk. And when you do, the product that you make or the service that you provide is pretty natural to that, you know? And so,
it reminds me, like I'm a child of like the 80s and 90s, so it reminds me like even of those advertisements where you would see doctors smoking cigarettes and like, you know, 9 out of 10 doctors smoke Camel. Like, really? Craziness. So you said something super interesting about, you know, this reason to believe or reason to buy. What about brands that are still looking for that reason, or brands that haven't found? I think a really interesting case study, I don't have any of their videos, but everybody's going to know exactly the brand I'm talking about when we get into it, is Red Bull. You know, Red Bull comes out and they're an energy drink. I mean, and people need to remember, like they came out in the late 80s, early 90s, where like energy drink, like what is an energy drink? Like they were still like a very cloudy market in defining the brand and what it was. And they latched onto extreme sports. And their chief marketing officer was incredibly forward thinking at the time to kind of almost put his brand in a back seat and focus on extreme sports, because that grabbing onto that market transformed that brand. And I think that they've got their own network right now. They've got their own sporting events now. They've got a Red Bull Stadium here in New Jersey where they have their own soccer team. So that transformation of that brand from trying to push an energy drink to actually supporting and getting behind extreme sports is incredible idea. First of all, because you're basically letting your brand and what your brand is kind of not even have its moment to shine and explain like this is what we are. But you're grabbing onto something where, like, if I'm at a 7-Eleven and I open up that cooler and I'm looking at energy drinks, when I look at that one, I'm not looking at the logo. I'm seeing the name, and I'm bringing all of those emotions of like high energy, sports, adventure, freedom. All those things come back to me because they've built it in an incredible way. And I'd be interested to talk to that marketing team when they made that decision, because that decision transformed their entire brand as we know it. And finding that purpose, I think, is something that brand did in an incredible way that probably they wouldn't even be in existence today if they didn't rethink outside the box and go after that audience.
Well, right. Like, and if I recall correctly, I believe, because I remember, maybe it was in the 90s or whenever, I think Red Bull originally was a European brand. And I remember, like, when it came over here, the commercials were these like little squiggly line animations. Remember that little like cartoon guy, and there was like this Red Bull gives you wings, and that was kind of classic advertising, whatever. And you're right. Once they realized, and that's another example of a reason to believe and a reason to buy being very intertwined. It was like, clearly Red Bull is an energy drink that you need to be able to do these kinds of crazy extreme sport things. So it was like, got it. But and I always use them as an example in a lot of my presentations when I talk about brands being media networks. I mean, they actually are. They have a company that is. But and they're putting out like amazing things. But you're exactly right. Like, they've created. I couldn't actually tell you. I'd have to really think about it. I couldn't tell you a piece of Red Bull advertising that I've even seen in so many, I don't remember, but I've seen so much Red Bull content and amazing experiences. I mean, I remember, I wish I had stats on it right now, but this may be over 10 years ago, but I'm pretty sure the entire world tuned in to watch that dude skydive from outer space.
That was exactly, I was going to say, I think the last piece of advertising, they made a 30-second commercial from that event.
Yeah.
But they didn't make that commercial. Like, that commercial was just pulled from that footage, and that was it.
And they really have that. They're a good example of, and I believe any brand can do that. Now, you might not be, that's such an exciting light smoke, but to your specific audience and to who you're trying to build an army around, you can do that. And it's coming up with like, okay, what do we stand for? Who are the people that align with that? And then what are the stories or events or things that we want to put out into the world, or shows? I mean, gosh, they're a brand that had, I don't know if you ever saw Art of Flight. I'm an avid snowboarder. So when Art of Flight came out with Travis Rice, I mean, that was in the movie theaters. No one had ever seen a snowboard movie like that before. Another great example actually is Lego. They have
Lego.
three movies. But they've also done a lot of like series and shows on social and online as well. I mean, they've made these videos out of characters and things like that. So they're a brand that I'll reference a lot too, and going like, we can be more of a media network and utilize our programming to, obviously it includes our brand. That's the same thing. The Red Bull stuff, it includes Red Bull, but I think that's really the place that you as any brand want to go to. Like, I do think a lot of brands and marketers kind of go, oh yeah, well, that only Red Bull can do that, or only Lego can do that, because it's like every brand can do it.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and you might have better insights on this than I do, but I think one of the challenges for some massive brands is that they've lost their way. There's so many people that have either a stakehold or an opinion about the heritage and where we come from and our purpose and what it is. And I think, I'm sorry to say, but I think like the 80s, 90s, and 2000s clouded people's own ideas of what their brand was. Like, I remember being, like you said, I don't think I was ever believed in a brand ever. The only brand I ever believed in as a kid was Apple. And I remember getting an Apple IIe like in the mid 80s. And it was because of that Blade Runner-esque ad that Ridley Scott did, that I was like, wow, because I was a computer geeky nerd kid and I like sci-fi stuff, and that spoke to me, and I started to believe in that brand. But everything else was just to buy. And I think those ads kind of transformed these brands into, probably a misrepresentation of where they originally came from, because they were so focused on the sale and not really focused on the brand identity. And that's why I think we're in such an incredible, unique time with small and mid-sized businesses, because you actually have the opportunity. Like if I'm a small, like we're business owners, you and I own my company, you own your company. Like there are certain things that we inherently believe in and why we started and what we do. We can communicate that better than a Budweiser or a massive brand can, because we have a core value of our reasoning and our vision and our why. And some of these smaller brands and mid-sized brands that don't have such a legacy or don't have a lot of people that are standing in their way have a unique opportunity to be better communicators for their purpose. And if you are a business owner who started something because of a belief, that belief probably resonates in other people. So being true to that and pushing away this need to be a commercial or to need to be like, well, Budweiser this great ad and I'm a small microbrew, I need to make this great pour shot and stuff. Like that's probably not going to win with your brand. And because you're small and because you have a purpose and a reason, finding that purpose and reason and then communicating in a way, you're actually in an advantage over these bigger brands.
I mean, I think, it's a little bit of a cliche example these days, but Dollar Shave Club is a great example of that, where it came out and what was it, 6 or 7 years ago. And I mean, it helped that they had a pretty charismatic CEO guy in front of the camera, but he and his buddy were just like, let's just make a video of what I believe, and what you watch that, it was funny and well done, but it was like, okay, I watched one video. I think that's all they made. They just made that one video. And you watch it and you're like, I get the personality of this. I loved his sort of his stick it to the man vibe of like, these big places are screwed. Like, you don't need it. You need this and this and this. I don't need 27 blades and that. And you're just like, yeah, and the rest is history for that brand, obviously. And you're exactly right. And one thing that I learned in advertising, I think when I was younger in my career, I would always be like to my creative directors, why can't you convince them? Why can't you convince them and convince them? And as I've matured and gotten more into that role, one thing I've learned is like, wow, okay, the client, is probably 3 layers down and they're just another human being, like trying to keep their job and trying to not ruffle any feathers. And it's like, oh, okay, it's not that easy. And I do think one of the reasons why a lot of the younger, or not younger, but the smaller startup type things are really poking through is because they don't have that. They're like, I got one shot. I'm going to make a thing. And I don't have, you're right. I don't have the legacy of how things have been done for years. I don't have the bureaucracy. I don't have the setup. I don't have the word. I'm not going to fire myself for making an ad that, I don't like. And so I do think that, and I don't know if there's an answer for it, to be honest. Like, as I've worked with midsize, I've felt it as an outsider. Like, it's just easier to be honest and true. But then when you get bigger into some of the, like we've worked together on some really big brands, it's just hard. And it's like, there is no magic. There's nothing I can really do or anybody can really do to go change that dynamic. That is that dynamic. And I think some of those big dinosaurs, I think you are starting to see some of them go, wait, let's, especially as like little guys are starting to nip at their toes. They're like, how do we act more like that? I don't have an answer for it other than I know I personally just sort of go after the more fun stuff, the small to mid-sized stuff, just because I've already lost all my hair and I don't need any more of a headache. But it's just people, it's just humans and opinions and being worried about what the person above you thinks. And that's what has kept so much of marketing and branding kind of in this stuck space.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, and I kind of want to shift to like the ways in which creative is actually being executed now, and how good creative doesn't need to be these flashy ads anymore. But it's very interesting that I think, you know, and you and I have been in rooms together where you're trying to convince a brand on how to create their content, and they always want to get back to their traditional, you know, commercial ways. And you're like, yeah, but we're in a different time right now, and I think we need to kind of like rethink how we're communicating to our audiences. I think one of the things that can be a challenge is that, you know, a lot of people historically, like you said, they're trying to keep their jobs. So it's like, what has worked? Let's just keep that going, because I've got 2 more years before I can retire. So why am I going to, you know, I understand everybody's on Facebook right now, but like there's no proof. It's just, it's a new thing. I don't really understand it. I'm an older traditional person. I'm just going to keep that going until I can get out of here. And that becomes a massive issue. But I think when you have a situation like we're currently in, it forces massive change. I mean, I don't see a world. Georgia just released their guidelines for production last week that I was kind of looking through. And I don't see a world we live in where you're going to have massive like crews of 20 or 30 people. If anything, production is going to be the last thing that opens up around, you know, the entire country as far as jobs go. So you've got to find creative ways to do it. And I think brands are doing it now. And I think one of the things that's super interesting is like you try to get them to understand that if you make an ad or you make a commercial or you communicate to your audience on these platforms with the ways in which they natively interact with those platforms, you're going to actually reach them in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you just pumped the 30-second commercial to them. Yeah. And one of the best examples of that is this next thing I want to show. I'm not going to tee it up. We'll just kind of like show it, and then we'll show the commercial they made for this product after, and we'll talk about which one actually got the better traction.
Hey, I'm really excited to share with you something I got. Okay, I went to Kohl's today. I had to make a couple returns. Stuff didn't fit. Surprisingly, it was a little too big. Thank you. I know some of you may be thinking the opposite. Shame. No shame. It's all love. It's all love. Okay, so here's what I found when I was at Kohl's. And I'd like to say that I bought this for my son that would really, really want it. And let's be honest, he'll probably confiscate it from me. Confiscate? That's a word, right? Okay, so he'll probably take it from me. However, this is mine. Like, when it's said and done, at the end of the day, this is mine that I bought. And I'm going to keep it for my own. You can see it kind of has Star Wars. Oh, you're getting a little hint. Okay, so you want to see what I got? It's so great. I can't wait to show you. Okay, this is part of my birthday joy. Still rejoicing in my birthday. And so here's what I got. I'm going to take it out of the box. And I can't wait to show you. Okay, I'm in a parking lot and people are literally looking at me like crazy. I don't even care. Okay, so here it is. Hold on. It may be a little tight. It may be tight on me. I got to undo it just a little bit. Hold on. Stay patient, people. Stay patient. This is going to be worth it. I promise. Maybe not, but it's worth it to me. And I had to share with my friends on the internet webs. So here's what I'm having trouble getting it. Okay, patient. All right, we're doing good. Okay, so this is what I got. Once again, this is for me, not for Duncan, not for Cadence. I mean, I'll let them play with it. I'm not a bad mom. I'm not a jerk, but in all honesty, at the end of the day, it doesn't go in their toy box. It goes in my room. So here we go. I gotta take off my glasses for it. Oh, naturally. Okay, here we go. So, yes! Now watch when my mouth actually moves. That's not me making that noise, it's the mask! Here, listen.
And hilarity ensues for the next 5 minutes. The reason why I didn't cut out that first 2 minutes is because first of all, that ad's posted 4 years ago. the reason I didn't cut it out is because it contradicts every single best practice standard that we were told while we were trying to make commercials during that time, or advertising during that time for brands, right? I mean, we don't see the mask for 2 minutes in, and it's got 136 million views on Facebook alone. Star Wars page on Facebook has 91 million. It has more views than the people who actually follow the Star Wars page on Facebook, and so it's incredible that first of all what it became. But it'd be different if she had the mask on when she began. I'd be like, okay, I get why people watched it, because like right from the beginning she's putting the mask on, she cut out all the prelude, but people had to sit through that thing for 2 minutes to really get what everybody was so enamored with. And I think she kind of comes across as this character that sells this thing through in a way that brands just couldn't do, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's that still gets me to this day. Well, then they made an ad. Didn't like Hasbro make a ad?
So here, let's show that.
The best place in the galaxy for everything Star Wars. Walmart.
I mean, you can't compare.
Advertisers. There you go, right there. No, I think it's right though. I mean, and there's a million of these examples of where culture is self-creating, this virality and these, building of popularity or brands or whatever you want to call it. And agencies are still stuck in like, well, there's these formulas that we have to use. We have to do this, we have to do this, and we have to do this. Honestly, I think one of the biggest answers is more like crazy ad people need to jump over and become brand people. And nobody wants to do that because they just have this perception that, and I, as working with brands directly, in a little bit of a different place, I'll tell you what, though, there's some fertile ground there. And there's a lot of talented people there, and it's just different. It's like, I remember the first place I went, and they was like, "Oh, you have a dress code? Oh, whoa, okay." Like I've never had a dress code, and I was like, and that was one of the first things I did was I said, "Hey, at least for the agency group that we're building, like get rid of that." And they're like, "Why?" I'm like, "Trust me." There's just these things that you don't really know, but like they are where they're not two different worlds, you kind of know. You walk into those brands and you're like, this feels creative. It feels like they believe what they believe. It feels different. And there's just a lot. And then you've also walked into other brands where you're like, this is sucking the soul out of me. And I think the environment in which you exist and the people who exist in that environment kind of facilitate those types of things. And I'm sure Walmart is a great place and all that, but I got to imagine Walmart corporate is not necessarily like and so I'm not surprised that when a brand, and that's kind of it, even as a marketer, I'm always like, once brands and advertisers get involved, mom and dad have showed up to the party and they've made it suck. That's the goal.
Yeah.
Like, how do you not do that? Not only not do that, how do you get in and actually create the party? And some of the best brands are doing that, they're not jumping in on that. I could have thought of a million better ways that, well, probably not. I could maybe come up with 2 or 3 on a good day that Walmart could have utilized that and that woman better and still done. Like you look at Aviation Gin, for example, how they use the girl from Peloton, I don't know if you saw that. They brought her on. They made an ad, but it was funny. It was great. It was like, sort of self-deprecating. She was drinking the gin because she had a bad day. Like that was smart. And that doesn't feel like it's an ad,
Yeah. I think the other thing too, I think a lot of brands may have the misconception. It's like, does this brand of marketing like Chewbacca Mom, does it sell product? And I mean, she found that mask in a bargain bin. And I think within a week of that thing going viral, those masks were flying off the shelves and people were actually selling them on eBay for like $1,000. So yes, I mean, and I think that's one of the things, like, sometimes brands actually forget their target audience, and Chewbacca Mom is Star Wars target audience. I mean, she's wearing a Star Wars shirt. I don't know if you can really see it but like, that's their diehard fan base, are these people. And sometimes they lose sight of it, but this is the type of content that their fan base resonates with deeply. And I think that's something that this thing is showing has the ability to actually change things. I mean, she went on to be, she went on the Tonight Show. She went all over the place. And what does she do every time she appears on one of these shows? She brings her mask with her. Free advertising, It's funny. They actually made a Halloween commercial with her and Walmart that did terribly. That Walmart ad, by the way, has 157 views on YouTube, whereas her on YouTube has close to 12 million, if not a little bit over. So it just goes to show that that this is that there are ways to market if you stop being so precious about the ways in which you package things, but you really kind of focus on the message that's in that package. I think that's the issue. We get so clouded with like the right camera, the right look, the right actors, all stuff like that you start to kind of get confused as a brand where your packaging becomes the thing that you want to showcase, and you kind of lose sight of what's at the core of that package.
I think that's really important. I like the way you put that. The packaging, at least historically and traditionally, the packaging actually ends up kind of being like kryptonite for a lot of consumers. Like, the way that we package things as marketers typically is the thing that makes a consumer go, no, and so that's really the key. Is like, again, I think if you focus more on just like who you are as a brand and go, let me throw all the packaging out. Let me start over. Let's say there's no way to package. Who are we? What do we believe? Why do we exist? How does that tie into the product or service that we provide? And then go natively, let's bring that to the world and let's try things. But there is this sort of like resistance to sort of dump the packaging, and I think you're seeing a lot of the young brands come in because they don't have any of the packaging. They can't afford it. They're just like, they've been like, I'm shooting this on my phone and I'm making it. It's like, boom, you're authentic. You're talking to me on my terms. You're not really trying to advertise to me. And usually the brands are doing is like, that was funny. That was a good concept. That was smart. I mean, you look at Hot Ones, for example, just like, it's just an interview show. There's a million. We're on one right now, but they said, hey, I'm going to add this funny thing where we have to eat chicken wings that get hotter and hotter. So by the end, they'll be crying, like just a good idea with a good hook, and production value on that. I mean, it got better as all of a sudden people started getting into it. But at the beginning, it was just a camera in a room and a table.
Yeah.
And that guy's done quite well for himself.
Yeah. It's a show on True TV. Yeah. So I kind of want to wrap everything up with kind of like where we are and obviously, I don't think you or I could even predict what tomorrow is going to be like for advertising and for marketers, because one of the challenges I think that everybody has, and I think that this is something that has been super relevant to social media, is being timely with your content. And a couple weeks ago, the right tone and right content for people during this situation was much different than what we are today, which will be much different than we are tomorrow. And so making sure you're a brand that can actually pivot and make content that actually is not being disingenuous, not being sensitive to where people currently are, but also trying to stay top of mind is going to be very, very challenging. So I want to show one last commercial that Coors did, a very quick one, and then we'll kind of talk about how they did it, and then we'll talk about maybe where advertising needs to go over the next year or so.
I'd like to know why do know, whoa, whoa, mama, let me know. Why do people judge others? Love your neighbors, your brother. Who knows the pain and who knows the low? Them carry somewhere deep down in their souls. Let me know, mama, let me know. I'd like to know, whoa, whoa, I'd like to know what am I to make of my life? What am I to make of my life? Mama, let me know why them worry about tomorrow. Don't borrow from tomorrow. You live in constant sorrow. Put your first move.
So I was thinking about that spot this morning as I was getting ready to put this, come on today. And one thing that really I thought a lot about, and I hadn't thought about when I saw that ad last week when it first got released, was the authenticity of the people in it. You look at traditional beer commercials and they're these perfect models that are well made up. And even, you look at a brand like Mick Ultra, where it's all these workout people, everybody's got the perfect physique. They're not like people like you or I that are like struggling in the gym. They're like doing it, and then they go out and have a beer after, and they're really hot looking guys and girls, and this thing, like, they're real. Like, I felt like the casting choice, and that's what it is. I mean, you got to remember, those people were casted, right? But the fact that they made them like without makeup, and I just felt, and it kind of interesting because you kind of, one of the points you made while we watched the stock launch was being authentic and genuine. And I feel like beyond everything else, say what you will about Coors, whatever, about their product, but like the authenticity of what that spot is real. And I think so many people are in that same space right now with this whole work from home culture that it really resonates, and it's really good for right now. Whether it works in 3 weeks from now or a month from now, I'm not sure. But I think it works, and I think that's a type of creative advertising that we have to think about moving forward for any type of brand, small, medium, large brands, whatever.
Yeah, I think, I think authenticity too, in terms of understanding the audience, is what a lot of brands are figuring out. Like right at first, when this thing really became a thing, all the brands did kind of what you would expect, and it's fine. I don't really critique it too much. I understand where it's coming from, but it was a lot of like emotional, in these unprecedented times. That's why brand X is always here for you, and we do this and that. And it's still kind of like, wait a minute, you're still just sort of making an ad, talking at me. And again, no one has gone through this, so I would have probably done the same thing, to be honest, because I don't know what we're doing, and maybe this thing will be done next week. I don't know, but as we've started to realize, like, I don't know when or what is going to go on, brands have started to, in two ways. I think they've been forced to do it because of production realities. They've been forced to be authentic. You're seeing right now a lot of like, what's awesome, I think that's going to be one of the best things on the other side of this, is that we've learned to embrace authenticity. I love it. Like a lot of artists I follow, like that are doing like Instagram live, like concerts just in their living room. It's like normally it's a $200 ticket and a $5 million production. Like I'm getting to see that. And I think you're also, what you've seen with brands is they've come in and they've said, okay, wait a minute, we need to actually think about our consumer and our audience and what they're going through. The insight, I think now brands and creatives, especially in advertising, are saying, let's not jump to the creative solution so quick. Let's dig in and understand what our audience is going through. We should be doing that all the time anyway, but now especially. Right. And so that Coors is a great example. They're like, okay, one of the many things that people are going through is like Zoom fatigue. Like it's a huge thing. Like everybody's just doing video conferences for work all day. So they came up with a great way to insert their mission, their personality, their reason to believe and reason to buy. It's like you need a beer, but you can't get one because you're on video conference all day. Well, let's give people a reason to laugh. And that was great. Heinz did a fun thing where they made a puzzle, like a 500-piece puzzle of all Heinz red, because it's like impossible to do, but it was just like, we know you're at home with nothing to do, and and maybe you've got kids, here's a puzzle, so I think both of those examples are kind of funny, which is also good. It's like, man, okay, we went through this phase of like, holy cow, we're all freaking out, and now into a phase of like, okay, if this is kind of a reality, we can laugh again, we can share again. So I think as our situation changes, like maybe in 2 weeks, it's like, oh, you can go back to work, but you can only go in shifts. Okay, brands are going to come up with solutions for the fatigue that creates, or to make that better. But I do think it's cool that you're seeing brands doing more versus just talking. Because I think a lot of people kind of need that. I saw a study recently where it was like 70% of people don't want to hear from brands right now. And then as you dig into it, it's like, oh, they don't want to be advertised to like how they've typically been advertised to, but they want brands' help. They want brands to help them, feel better about their situation, or give them, that to me is a full-on utility. It's just a fun thing that they say here, make a background, right, and pretending to be there. And I think, again, whatever the other side of this looks like, I hope that's what marketers really take with them, is like the obsession to understand what their consumer is going through and needs, the insight part, which, we've sat through a lot of creative briefings together. And I can always tell when I sit through a creative briefing, the creatives who like continually annoy everybody by asking questions, they're like, what about this? What does the audience think? They're the ones who are going to crack it versus the ones that are just sitting there like, oh, okay, I've got an idea. Let's go. It's like, you're not even taking the time to like really get under the skin of the person you're trying to talk to. And then also for brands to just be much more focused on, I love the packaging, and like less of the packaging and more of like what's inside that box. Because to your point, like, that Coors thing, that was natural that it was shot, because it was like Zooms and stuff. But yeah, I would have guessed. And in fact, I would have thought, until you said they had to be actors, of course they did SAG, but like, I would have been like, oh yeah, that's just all the agency employees. Like, that's how I literally thought that. But I'm like, oh wait, of course, leave it to Jason to remind me of the production reality. It's like, but yeah, that was important to do. And I think that's also critical for us to move forward and go, hey, like, we lived a year like this. So even once we get out of that, it's like, hopefully we are more accepting of authenticity and reality versus the ad. Because the advertising packaging and that makeup and the extra lights and the expensive cameras and the perfect chiseled bodies, like, that doesn't actually connect as well as the normal person.
Right. Well, I think I've been thinking a lot about, obviously, you have a lot of time to think about what positive you can actually pull out of this situation, because there's just been so much negative, and, how it's impacted me. I live in Brooklyn. I'm in a 2-bedroom with 2 kids, and, we live very close by to a hospital where, it's overflowing with people right now. And it's very tragic, and it's a challenging time that we live in. But you try to think about where are there glimmers of things that you can actually, find better ways to understand what the situation is and how you can pull something positive of it. And I think one of the things from a marketing and branding and production perspective is the ways in which we all share in something, and we're all sharing in this very tragic moment, and it's shining a light on how we are all connected through this story that we're currently involved in. But you remove this current situation, and there are universal stories that we all share in every single day. And those stories that can speak to us, whether it be on branding or whether it be in a film or a movie, a TV show, long form branded content, those are the things that people really resonate with and identify with. And you said something interesting about like this authenticity and how it's kind of carried through, and how this moment may actually be a time when brands understand that this authenticity is something that is desperately needed. And you said that, people don't want advertising, but they don't want traditional advertising. They're looking for a way to be spoken to. And I think it's because we all are so in desperate need of connections right now. We're so in desperate need of finding community that goes through the same pain we're all going through. Like I said, I live in my apartment. Like, I don't know what's going on next door because I can't go outside and know what's going on next door. So I'm so desperately like, boy, I had an argument with my kid today because she needs schooling, but I need to work and keep getting my business going. Like, it's refreshing to see that other people are dealing with the same pains and the same sufferings I am. And I think brands, because of their mass abilities to communicate, and they've done it historically, are in a unique position where if they can tell those stories in a compelling way, that I can be like, oh, I'm not alone. mean, it's not all we're looking for in this world is like to be like, I'm not alone in my situation. And so I think it's like I really do hope you're right. I hope that this moment kind of on the other side of it continues and we can get back to really understanding that there are universal needs that we all have. And when you put something out creatively that speaks on that universal level, you kind of have some gold there.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I think it's weird, you know. I mean, my wife and I were telling our kids, we're like, wait a minute, like, you know, in our lifetime, we've looked back in the history books of some of these huge events that happened generations ago, and I'm like, we're in one. Like, we're in one right now, and like we don't know, and we've not really had anything, like I said, in our lifetime to compare it to. But historically, you look back, and the world changes. It adapts. It's hard, but it comes out better. It comes out positive. There's new learnings, and so we're all guessing and hoping and of how it will be. But at the same time, you know, like you said, when we're in the middle of it, we're all doing our best to survive. Right. You know, emotionally, economically, I mean, physically, for a lot of people. So it definitely is. It's an unprecedented time, but that's one thing I try to remind myself of as I try to compare it to anything. I'm like, I can't, and that doesn't help me. You know, it's like I can't compare it, but I agree. You know, being able to do these kinds of conversations to connect, you know, to chat about things that I think are on a lot of people's minds, and I agree with you there. I think brands have a really awesome opportunity right now because to help, you know, or not. And there, like I said, there's a million ways to help. Just emotionally make me laugh, or hey, give me a tool that makes me get a beer when I'm on this, or connect me, or tell me that, you know, we're all in this. Whatever it is, you know, it's a time right now to, and gosh, how fortunate that this happened in a time where technology allows us to do it.
Yeah. I never thought about that, but you're right. You're right.
We can. There's. You know, I mean, we really can. Yeah, it's like, okay, the camera's a little different. It's the one on your phone or on your laptop, but it's like, we're still being able to do it. We just got to get a little more creative. But like, that's going to be good. And that's going to like push out a whole new awesome thing. So, you know, on the other side of it. So, you know, who knows, man, but it's, you know, one day at a time.
Yeah, totally. And I really appreciate you coming on. I know it's Memorial Day weekend. I didn't even know that it was when I booked this. It's like every day blurs into, like, every day's a holiday and every day's not a holiday at the same time, if you know what I mean.
I could not tell you what day it is today, so that's fine. There's not a lot going on in the old jurors for Memorial Day right now. If you're following the guidelines, there's not. For those who aren't, they're out having a great time. But my wife and I and my kids, we try to follow the guidelines to the T. We do go for a run every day in the park, but it's literally a run. It's not a stop. It's you know, and we kind of like remark at all the people who are not following the guidelines, but you know, it is what it is. Yeah.
So Steve, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great conversation. There's so much to be learned. And I think like as we move into this next phase of creative evolution and where we're going, I think this moment is actually going to help a lot of bigger brands understand the reach they can have and how creative they need to be. But I also think maybe it shines a spotlight on some of these smaller brands that are just like, actually they have they're positioned in a unique way to kind of really push themselves in ways that these bigger brands can't. And if you are a small brand right now, like this is the moment to really be jumping on advertising. Like Facebook ad spend is at like an all-time low right now. So you can reach a massive audience. Everybody's on Facebook, everybody's online right now. So the opportunity to reach a massive audience, if you've got a great message to say and you've got your purpose kind of like at the core that you can push content out of, there's a way to reach people that you couldn't even like 4 or 5 months ago. So
that's right. That's right. I mean, my wife, you know, she has always wanted to start this little like personal training, you know, fitness business. And obviously with me being home, you know, bless her heart, she doesn't know how to operate a camera or whatever, but like, okay, I can do basic production. I mean, you're going to laugh at me doing production, like filming and editing. I learned Adobe Premiere to make her little videos in like, I think today she had 1,000 followers on her Instagram and just some modest sponsored type postings, like the basics that anybody can do. She just hit 20K. And in like 4 weeks. And it's like, okay, clearly there's also a moment where everyone's like, I got to do fitness and I'm going to do it remotely or whatever. But like, I promise if she and my limited production skills can do that, like anybody can do that. So you're exactly right. Like, and the playing field's leveled. It doesn't matter the size. Everybody hopefully is going to come down to the middle. These big brands are going to go, wait a minute, let's come down and be more authentic. And these brands that don't have resources are going to go, wait, we can play at the same level. So just, yeah. So no, it's been awesome, man. It's good to see your face and good to connect. I'm really glad you reached out. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been great. We've had quite a few people kind of tuning in. Hopefully people, get some benefit from it. I think the past 2 podcasts have been great. A lot of people have responded. I think this one is just going to be another checkbox of people that are looking for some answers that a lot of brands, marketers, businesses are kind of searching for right now. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You got it, man. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, man.
Bye.
Bye.